Hello, happy innovators. How are you doing? I know what you're thinking. I know. I promised you in that last podcast that I was going to get busy making you some more Singularity podcasts. And sure enough, 2 weeks go by and there's nothing from me. And I know that you're thinking that I was shirking my Singularity podcast duties, but I'm here to tell you that you're wrong, okay? You're wrong. Because I wasn't shirking my duties. Basically, what happened was, a completely unexpected, unforeseen, unpredictable tragedy happened in my family, okay? And I'm going to explain to you what happened. That's what this podcast is going to be about today, just so you can kind of get an idea of what was going on. And so here it is, okay? About 2 weeks ago, my wife came home from work on a Friday, okay? Friday night, getting ready for the weekend, and let me tell you, okay, it was one of those weeks where it was kind of a rough week. Like, my wife was particularly tired and fatigued from work, and I was kind of like looking forward to spending some time with her and maybe sleeping a lot, catching up on our sleep and having a nice, quiet, pleasant weekend, okay? Well, not so much, because when she came home, we got a phone call from her father. Now, my wife's mother and father live in Las Vegas, Nevada, okay? Which, if you look at a map of the continental United States and you look at Massachusetts and you look at Nevada, you can see that it's pretty much on the other side of the country, okay? So anyway, we get this phone call from her father, and he says that he wants to speak to me, okay? So I get on the phone, and he proceeds to tell me that my wife's mother had passed away, okay? And my wife is an only child, okay? That's something that you should know. So she doesn't have any brothers or sisters or anything. And her mother had passed away in her sleep, okay? An elderly woman, and it just kind of punched us both like right in the gut, okay? I mean, it was just like, what? Like, what? Because, she wasn't sick. There wasn't anything wrong. There was no lead up to this event. It just happened. And, my wife's mother and father had been married for a long time. They had been married for about 50 or 52 years, I think, to be exact. And we were just kind of in shock, like, what? Like, what? She died? Like, what? She's not here anymore? Like, what are you talking about? This doesn't make any sense, So, needless to say, okay, that idea of having this, quiet, restful weekend was abruptly, abandoned. And, we hopped on the next flight, okay, to Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, this was a strange experience, I think more so for my wife, really, obviously, than it was for me, okay? Because she was my mother-in-law, and I loved her, and I cared about her, and I love her daughter, okay? This is the most important person in my life. I mean, really, okay? My best friend, And she just got the worst news, that she lost her mother. And, honestly, my wife and I both had, over the years, we kind of had thought about it. We've talked about it, like, you explore the idea that one day, one of your parents might die, or one of us might die, like what would happen? What would we do? And, if my mom passed away, what would we do? How would we handle it? What would it be like? And, you just maybe try to imagine it, and then you forget about it and you go on with your life, right? And that's kind of like how it went for her and for I, over the duration of our marriage. So we've been married now for about 15 years. We have an anniversary coming up. And I've known her mother for, probably about 30 years, okay? Maybe even more than that now. I'm not even sure. But I've known her mother for a very long time, and I've known her father for a very long time, obviously. So it was an interesting experience. It was sad, and it was kind of like, you get on the plane, you're heading there, and you don't really know what to expect. We had traveled there before, but, it was to see both of her parents. So it was really kind of an unknown, like what we were going to find on the other end of this journey, which is a very long journey. Okay, it's about, I think, 6 hours by airplane from Massachusetts to Las Vegas, Nevada. And it was also kind of weird because normally when my wife and I travel to Las Vegas, we go during the summertime where there's no snow on the ground or anything. So there's no real difference between the weather where we're living and the weather where they're living. So this was the first time that we traveled during the winter. So we left like right as like a blizzard was going to set in on the area that we live in. We jumped on a plane, flew to a place that's, a desert, really. It's a city built in the desert. That's what it is. Okay, so one thing I need to express to you, okay, I need to tell you, because this is a factor in this story, okay? About like 3 days before we got the phone call from my wife's father, okay, about her mother's passing, I was out in my yard, okay, and everything where we live at that moment was frozen ice. Like everything was ice. It wasn't just cold. It wasn't just winter with snow. Everything was frozen, okay? And I'm walking through my property and I step on a piece of black ice, okay? And I slipped and fell and I landed right on my bum. And let me tell you something, okay? It was like as soon as I hit the ground, I knew, like, I just got hurt, okay? I knew it, like something, I just did something to my back, okay? Well, let me tell you, for the next like 3 days after that, okay, leading up to the day where we got this phone call, my ass like hurt so bad. It was like just standing up and sitting down. It was like so painful. Okay. Like, wow. Okay. It hurt. I really hurt myself. Okay. Now, I didn't go to the doctor. It wasn't like that kind of thing. Okay. But I was in need of like healing. Okay. It needed to heal because it was extremely uncomfortable. Anyway, so now you can imagine, okay, we get this phone call with this bad news, and now, like, I realize, okay, I'm gonna have to do this, flying for 6 hours one way and 6 hours back. I'm gonna have to endure this extreme pain, okay, for this trip, okay? And it's laughable now, but let me tell you, at the time, it was like, impending doom, okay? And I'm all healed now, so everything is okay. But so we get on this flight, we jump on this flight to Las Vegas. So after enduring, this 6-hour flight that was like the pit and the pendulum, we get off the plane, and our first experience is like, wow, the weather is like gorgeous here. Okay, because like I said, normally we go there during the summer, and when we go there during the summer, the weather there is like really hot and really dry. It's a desert. But apparently, when you go to Las Vegas in the winter time, it's actually like 60 degrees, 70 degrees. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous weather. Okay, very pleasant. So that was our first whiff of Las Vegas when we got off the plane for this, this funeral trip that we were taking, right? So that was pleasant. And we were both kind of like shocked by that, okay? Like right away, the vibe, even though we were there to deal with this horrible situation, the vibe wasn't necessarily bad, okay? But, now I guess I can say, let me get a sip of my coffee here. I got a nice hot cup of coffee to sit down and explain myself to you today. So I'm going to take a sip. Now, okay. One thing I want to mention really quick, okay, is that, prior to this situation that we were faced with, I've explained to you that I'm like working on new music. So for like the prior 2 weeks to this trip, I was really rolling. I mean, I had like a rhythm, and everything is going great, and I'm having a lot of success in the studio, and my ideas are coming out strong, and I'm really into it, right? And then all of a sudden I'm kind of like yanked out of that, happy, system and success that I'm having, and rolling with my new material, like new songs, and I'm yanked out of that, and I'm thrust into this other situation, okay? So it was kind of like surreal in a way, okay? So we got off the plane, the weather's great, we hook up with her dad, we go to their house out there in the desert, and right away, I mean, the feeling was not negative. I mean, when we saw her father, it was not sad, really. It was happy. We were happy to see her dad. And of course, my wife and her dad were clinging to each other. I mean, they had just lost this person who was really quite a character, quite a remarkable woman in a lot of ways. I could probably devote a Singularity podcast to her. Her life was that interesting, and both my father-in-law and my mother-in-law had quite a remarkable career together as antique collectors. Okay, and my father-in-law is a notable, I guess you could call him like a guru for antique collectors out in Las Vegas. He's good friends with that Mark Hall Patton, the guy from Pawn Stars. They've worked together. He's an author, and my mother-in-law was a co-author. She was part of his machine, and she helped him along, and she was instrumental in their success as a couple. So it was kind of she was kind of an interesting lady, and she was also very funny. Like, she had a very playful kind of personality. She said funny things. She had a lot of funny quotes and funny responses to things. Like, I can give you an example. Like, when my wife was younger, and she would say things to her mother like, oh, it used to be this way. Why can't it be this way anymore? Like, why can't I have that again? And her mother would start singing, those were the days, my friend. I thought they'd never end. She had like this funny kind of personality, like I guess kind of a smart ass, like in a way, but in a very playful and funny way. Okay. And where it was really funny, her timing and, what she would come up with. Right. So that's important, I guess, in the story because, okay, so basically, okay, we hook up with her dad and he kind of establishes with my wife, like right off the bat, that he doesn't really want to get his arms around the whole funeral process thing. He doesn't really want to have it his way. He wants my wife to have it her way. He wants her to be happy with how the situation with her deceased mother is handled. So we're talking about, viewing the body, cremation. Her mother had requested cremation, the sprinkling of her ashes on a particular location. So like her father was not pushing it off on her as much as he was kind of like giving her freedom to choose a way of handling her deceased mother's remains in a way that would make her happy. Okay. Which I thought was really kind of sweet in a way, like that he was that open to making his daughter happy. Okay. And I gotta say, even though we were there because of this tragedy, I have to say that the spirit of everyone was somehow, like, mysteriously not sad. I mean, we were sad. We would cry and we would mourn a little, but most of the time the spirit was not down. It was actually up. And both my wife and myself and my father-in-law, really, we were all kind of like articulating that to each other. Like, isn't it strange that we're not really, really sad all the time? Like, we're actually kind of like sometimes even having fun and laughing about things and laughing about memories and remembering things. And of course, like, her father and mother were antique collectors. So, they had photograph albums and scrapbooks and pictures and just artifacts, things from the past that they had accumulated over the years. So there was a lot of this, like, pouring through the past, and it was not with a heavy heart. I mean, sometimes it was, but for the most part, for some weird reason, we all felt kind of happy. Okay. Like, so much so that we questioned it. Like, is this right that we should be this kind of like happy? We should be sadder than we are. Okay. So keep that in mind. Okay. Because it stayed with us throughout the duration of this trip and throughout the duration of this process of, dealing with my wife's deceased mother. Okay. So we get all the details about when she died and how she died, and she died in her sleep, and they had said it was a heart attack in her sleep. And my father-in-law expressed, she laid down to take a nap and she didn't, she felt tired. She laid down and she never woke up. And he went in and checked on her after a while and realized that she wasn't breathing anymore. So the paramedics came, etc., etc. She passed away. They carted her body off. That was it. Okay. So when we arrived, that was the state of the situation. Okay. Now, we had to meet with funeral people and all that kind of stuff. And my wife and I and my father-in-law, all three of us, we kind of tackled that together, and we dealt with everything together. So there were three minds coming together to work the situation out. And my wife decided that she wanted to view her mother's body before it was cremated. Okay, so they didn't do any kind of embalming or anything. They just stored my mother-in-law until my wife got there. And let me tell you, okay, now, and this is important, okay, because my wife and I have actually talked about this kind of thing. You kind of have to when you're married. I mean, you gotta talk to your spouse about what you want when you die, right? In case it happens, because no one ever promised me that I was going to be alive tomorrow. So, you got to sometimes think about it. Not all the time, but sometimes, right? And, my wife and I have always kind of felt real funny about the whole embalming thing and just kind of this normal process. I'm not necessarily keen on that for myself. I wasn't sure what I wanted, but I know what I don't want. My wife knows what she doesn't want. And we don't want to be, embalmed or something and, have people fussing or messing with our bodies after we've died. And, my mother-in-law apparently felt kind of the same way. Okay. She wanted to be cremated. She didn't want to have a wake. She didn't want to have a funeral. She didn't want to do the show. She just wanted to have dignity in her death and have it be quick and over with, okay? And not a lot of fuss and not a lot of people, just a small thing, just private, intimate family, okay? And they have a lot of friends out there, so that was a problem to some degree, because there were a lot of people who felt kind of cheated that they weren't able to, view her one more time and all the things that come along with a normal funeral. But my mother-in-law did not want that. So what she did want was to be cremated, and my wife wanted to see her one more time. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because, and man, let me tell you, this is something that really just kind of sticks in my craw, okay? And you don't really think about this, and you don't really know about it. You don't have a reason to know about it until you're in it, okay? But maybe I'm talking about it now to remind myself in the future, when I listen to this in the future, oh yeah, okay. Basically, okay, when someone dies and you start, incorporating all the people that handle, human death, okay, the industry people, okay, let me tell you something, okay, the guys that we dealt with were very pleasant, they were very timely, they delivered when they said they would, okay, so there's no complaint in that department, okay, but you pay for it. And let me tell you something, okay? This just chaps my ass, okay? They gouge the shit out of people when they die. The surviving members of the family, the prices, the expenses of things, they just nickel and dime absolutely every single thing, okay? And a huge markup on everything, for example, okay, my wife wanted to view her mother one more time, $125. Bam. Just a viewer, just to have a viewing. 15 minutes, that's it, $125. Now, if you want a lock of her hair, that's another $150. And I mean, just absolutely every single aspect of everything is not only, are you charged for it, but it's like quadrupled. Okay, it's criminal what they do. Okay, now, like I said, you have no reason to even think about these things until you're in the situation. Okay, but let me tell you, I will never forget this. It was a lesson in life. Okay, like what happens in the funeral industry is wrong. Okay, what they do is wrong, in my opinion. Okay, there is no reason why, simple things like that should cost so much. I mean, when we looked at the total bill, of this absolutely bare minimum, funeral situation. I mean, it was like my mother-in-law had specifically said she wanted the least amount. Okay, so we did it that way. We honored her wishes, and the bill was still like through the friggin' roof. Okay, and I'll tell you what, it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Like, it's disgusting what people do, like how they take advantage of people who are grieving and suffering like that and just jack the prices up to like whatever they want. And you know what? You gotta pay it because they're doing it. There's no one else to do it. That's what they do. So it was just bothers me that it's like that, And of course my father-in-law didn't really care. I mean, he didn't care. Just sign the check, done. But for my wife and I, we were both looking at each other like, man, this is kind of like BS. What they charge and what they get away with. Come on, I mean, there are no scruples when it comes to, charging people, that are in bereavement. They just are at the mercy of this industry that can charge whatever they want. Anyway, okay, so my wife says she wants to see her mother one more time. So $125, is spent. We're given a scheduled time to go and view my mother-in-law. Okay. Now, I guess in some ways, this part of the story is kind of humorous in the sense that my wife and I, we know that in a couple days we're going to go and we're going to look at the body of her mother, her deceased mother, and we kind of don't really know what to expect. Okay, now, and my wife and I had both talked about this very aspect of this situation. Like, we weren't sure what to expect. Like, we both had this vision in our minds, I guess, of like, some dude in a lab coat, like sliding some drawer open, and unzipping the bag, and like we see her, deceased mother with her hair all matted and, frozen, and, we had watched too many X-Files, like we had this image in our mind of what it might be like. So when we arrived at this building where the viewing was going to take place, my wife and I agreed that I would go in first and kind of like suss out the situation a little bit and kind of like go back out to her and kind of tell her what she can expect. Or like, maybe something like, honey, you don't really want to see her. Okay. Or what wound up happening was I went into the room and I saw my mother-in-law, laying there. And as God is my witness, okay, she looked like she was sleeping. I'm not kidding. I mean, it was shocking, okay? They had her all covered up except for just her face was showing, a little bit of her hair. So she looked like a baby, like in a papoose, but she looked like she was sleeping. I mean, the color of her skin, it just was like amazing to me. I mean, I was so shocked. So I go out and I grab my wife. I'm like, come on, you come on in. You know, it's cool. It's safe. Come look. You're not going to be traumatized by anything. And my wife was just shocked as well. We just both stood there in complete shock that we were so off in like what we thought we might expect, you know, like what we might have been, you know, subject to. And it was, you know what? I gotta say this, okay? I've been to like a lot of wakes and funerals in my life. You know, I'm almost 50 years old now. I gotta say, of all the funerals and wakes that I've been to, this was the most pleasant and dignified one I'd ever been to. And my wife and I only had, 15 minutes. That's it. They start the clock, and after 15 minutes is up, the workers come in, they ask you to leave, and the viewing is over. Okay? But you know what? That was all that we needed. That was all that my wife needed. And I think she and I both were kind of like walking away from the situation in shock that it was as pleasant and as beautiful and as dignified and as simple and meaningful as it was. I mean, it really was. There wasn't any makeup on her. There wasn't any kind of lighting and, the show that they put on at wakes and funerals. There was none of that. It was just simple, dignified, natural. And you know what? It was fine. It was fine. It was okay. So, my wife and I walk away from the situation kind of talking to each other like, you know what? That wasn't so bad, I think I might want that for me. And she's like, I think I might want that for me too. Like, no embalming, none of that stuff, none of the show, just simple, man, simple. I die, put me in a cooler for a couple of days, give my family, my immediate family, 15 minutes to come see me if they want to, one last time, right? And that's it, man. That's it. That's all you need. You don't need hours and hours and catering and lighting and invitations and all that stuff. You don't need it. It was so much more dignified and beautiful the way that my mother-in-law had chosen to do it. And man, I can't express that enough. Okay? And by the way, my father-in-law had opted to not go with us. Okay? He didn't think he could handle it. Okay? And I guess in some ways I can understand that, but in hindsight, I think he might have actually not. It might not have been as hard as he thought. Okay, but what do I know? Okay, it was his wife, not mine. Okay, but anyway, so my wife and I are staying in Las Vegas. We're visitors for this situation. We're visiting, and we have a somewhat of a time constraint on how much time we have before we have to get back on a plane and get back to our life, right? And so time and the handling of the situation was a factor, okay? Not everything, but it was a factor, okay? It wasn't the most important thing. Like, if we had to stay longer, we could have, but we kind of expressed to the funeral industry people that we were dealing with that, time was of the essence, and that we, would like to have the situation wrapped up, in a timely fashion so that we could get back to our life. And I gotta say, this particular company or something, or funeral family or whatever that we were dealing with, they did come through for us, okay? And they handed us a urn full of ashes, in just a matter of a couple days after we viewed her mother for the last time. Now, the whole time my father-in-law was kind of like going back and forth about, being, organized and, disciplined and getting things done, and then grieving. There's like this swinging back and forth between that. So there was a lot of that. And he had kind of expressed to us like he didn't want to see her one last time. He didn't want to go with us to where we scattered the ashes. He wanted us to just handle it in a way that made my wife happy and honored the wishes of my mother-in-law. And he would just kind of stand back and just let us do it. He didn't want to be part of it. It was too much for him. But we were on our way to pick up this urn of ashes from my mother-in-law, and my father-in-law just kind of decided he wanted to go too. Okay, so we all jump in the car, we go to this place, we pick up this urn full of ashes, and my wife and I, a couple days prior, had gone to a spot that my mother-in-law had talked about where she wanted her ashes scattered. So my wife and I went to this spot, we found it, and we kind of explored it a little bit, kind of like a dry run, So the plan was to go pick up her urn and go right to that spot, just my wife and myself, and we would sprinkle her mother's ashes on this spot, okay? But now my father-in-law is in the car with us, and that wasn't part of the plan. So, which is fine. It was kind of in a way, it was kind of surprising, that he was kind of willing to go. He wasn't too, worked up. It was something he thought he could handle. And he did handle. But basically what wound up happening was, my wife and my father-in-law, because he's an elderly guy and he has a little bit of a hard time getting around and stuff. So there was no way he's going to do any mountain climbing. Okay. So the decision was made that since her father was with us, that they would kind of both hang back at the car where I parked the car, and I would take this urn of ashes, me, Mike, would take the urn of ashes and, climb up this mountain. Can't believe it. And, I would be the one who would sprinkle her ashes. Okay. Now, I have to remind you, okay, I hate to be like this, but I have to remind you about that, slip and fall that I had, a few days prior where my ass is killing me. Okay. So I had to kind of laugh, as I'm walking away from the car and from my wife and her father, who are, kind of holding hands and, watching from afar and, having whatever conversation they're having while I'm, trekking out onto this mountain and, preparing to scatter these ashes. Okay, so I'm walking away from the car and I'm thinking to myself, well, one, my ass is killing me. Okay, this is going to be painful, climbing a mountain with this situation in my bum. And, I'm also thinking to myself at the same time, I remembered when I first met my mother-in-law, the first time I ever met her, okay? The first time we ever talked, and it was so long ago, it was just so long ago. And I even explained this to my wife later, and she thought it was kind of funny. I was just kind of walking up this hill, walking up this mountain, really, with this urn of ashes, saying to myself, who would have ever guessed the first time I ever met that woman, okay, that of all the people she ever met, and there were millions, okay, and all the people that loved her and cared about her and knew about her, okay, who would have ever guessed when I first met her that I was going to be the guy who would scatter her ashes when she died, and I was going to marry her daughter, you know, and like I would be climbing a mountain in Las Vegas, Nevada. You know, we lived in Ohio. That's where we grew up, you know, it's where this whole story starts. You know, who would have ever guessed that I would be the guy climbing the mountain with her ashes, and I would scatter her ashes. Not her husband, not her daughter, not her brothers, or anybody like that. It was just one of those things that kind of like struck me as I'm climbing this mountain. And then it kind of like sunk in with me, like the gravity and the weight of what I'm doing now, what I'm about to do, and what an honor it was. And you know, I could see, you know, way off in the distance my car with my wife and her father, and there I am, you know, on top of this mountain. Now you have to kind of look at it from my perspective, all right? Just a few days prior, I'm sitting in my studio, you know, recording songs, and just a couple days later, you know, a few days later, I'm on top of a mountain in Las Vegas, sprinkling my mother-in-law's ashes, right? And then just a few days after that, I'd be right back in my studio again, making music. Pretty tripped out. I mean, it's almost like it was a dream and it didn't really happen. I mean, it's like so quick, and now it's all done, and I'm back in my studio, and I'm like, did this really happen? I mean, it was like so quick, just like a dream, okay? Or a nightmare, but no, it wasn't a nightmare. It was pleasant, you know? I sprinkled her mother's ashes. I followed through with her wishes, and everything was carried out to a T, exactly what she wanted, because I believe in that. You know, in my belief system, in my religion, okay, there's a thing called the corporeal acts of mercy, okay, and it is basically a set of protocols and standards on how to handle death and funerals and things like that. And so I take that very seriously. I always have. In fact, I actually worked at a cemetery for a while as like an exercise in the corporeal acts of mercy. I think a lot of my friends were wondering what the hell I was doing, but that's what I was doing. It was a spiritual thing. And I could do a Singularity podcast about that later on. I think I probably will, because it's important to talk about that. But the point is that I take this whole situation extremely seriously. I take it very seriously. So I followed through with my mother-in-law's wishes to an absolute detailed T. Everything perfect. Mission completed. Ashes are scattered. We kind of like go back to my father's place, kind of hang out a little bit, talk. Everything was okay. Everybody was okay. Everybody is okay. And we were kind of like, you know, once again reiterating that, like, should we be sadder than we are? I mean, it was like, for some reason, and this is the conclusion I came to, I think my wife kind of did too, and then ultimately my father-in-law did too, was that it just seemed, okay, that from the moment we got on the plane, from the moment we got off the plane in Massachusetts, when the trip was over, okay, there was a state of grace that we were all in. And we can't explain why. There wasn't a lot of crying and a lot of mourning and sadness. Maybe some of it was shock or something, because that was definitely a factor. But it just seemed like everything fell into place. There was no hassle. Everything went smoothly. Everything was dignified. And it wasn't completely sad. We had some positive experiences. We ate a lot of good food and talked a lot and laughed a lot and remembered a lot. And it was just, folks, let me tell you, it was just beautiful. And my wife and I both just kind of were talking amongst ourselves, kind of saying, you know, it does seem awfully weird. It just was really pleasant. You know, it was not what we thought it might be like. It was pleasant. And there was a state of grace It had kind of descended on us, and everything was okay. Everything was okay. Think about that. Everything was just okay. It was fine. And I thought about it, because, my mother-in-law, let me get a sip of my coffee here. Okay. My mother-in-law, in her spare time, when she wasn't working, they weren't doing their antique thing in Las Vegas, she had devoted a lot of her free time to working with the poor. She worked in a thrift store at her church. It was, social, but she had devoted a lot of her time to that situation and helping out people who were less fortunate or whatever. And I just kind of thought to myself, I don't know, maybe it was like a thought voice, speaking to me, saying that, this had been paid forward, that this grace that had descended upon us, particularly my father-in-law and my wife, and me too, the three of us, was a gift and a reward for the life that this woman had lived. Because she was a great woman, she had a lot of struggles, a lot of difficult things, she did a lot of amazing things. Obviously she remained faithful to her husband for 52 years. She raised a fantastic daughter, one of the greatest people I've ever known or will ever know. And just, this human being, this woman who lived a great life, and she did what she wanted to do, and she loved God, and she was now at peace, and now rest had come. She was resting. She had earned her sleep. She had earned her rest. And, we came home a few days later, and everything was over, everything was done. And, we were sad a little bit still, but both my wife, myself, and my father-in-law, we all kind of, even up to, right now, this very moment, we would all kind of say the same thing, that for some unknown reason, for some unexplainable reason, everything just came into place. And it wasn't so bad. Everything was okay. So that, my friends, is the story of why you haven't gotten a new Singularity podcast from me over the past couple of weeks. I wasn't shirking my duties. I was going through one of the most, surreal, amazing, profound, beautiful experiences, and it came and went, and now it's over. It's done. The mission is completed. It's done. My mother-in-law is at rest. And now, on with the grieving process in our own time and in our own hearts and minds. Okay, so now what I'm going to tell you is this. To cap off this Singularity podcast, I have a couple of Singularity podcasts I made for you prior to my going on this trip. But I'm going to give them to you. They're coming. I'm going to release them. But they may be a little disjointed, time-wise, chronologically, because obviously, they came before this podcast. So I'll let you figure it out, but you'll understand when you hear it. So with that, thanks for bearing with me. And remember, folks, if you want to keep what you've got to give it away. Take it easy.